Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian entered the imperial court of Tang Dynasty China at the age of 14 as a concubine of Emperor Taizong. She outlived him, survived the mandatory head shaving and confinement to a Buddhist convent that awaited imperial concubines upon their master's death, returned to court as the concubine of Taizong's son Gaozong, and then, over the following 4 decades, systematically dismantled every obstacle between herself and absolute power. In 690 AD, she declared herself Empress Regnant of a new dynasty, the Zhou, and ruled China alone until she was 80 years old. She is the only woman in Chinese history to have assumed the title of Empress in her own name as sole ruler, without a male co-regent. The institution of imperial China had existed for nearly 9 centuries before she did this. It existed for 12 centuries after. She remains singular. What she did to get there has been debated by historians for 1,300 years, with the debate complicated by the fact that the men who wrote the official histories had strong institutional reasons to present her in the worst possible light. The Tang Huiyao and the Old Book of Tang, compiled after her death by officials of the dynasty she had displaced, accused her of smothering her own infant daughter and framing the emperor's primary wife for the murder, an act that resulted in the wife's execution and Wu's elevation. Whether she did this is not provable from surviving sources. What is documented is the result. The empress consort and a senior imperial concubine were both executed, Wu's rivals in the succession were removed, and she had their hands and feet cut off before they were submerged in wine vats to drown. She reportedly called this making them drunk to the bone. It was not a metaphor. She built a network of informants and secret police that allowed her to identify and eliminate political threats before they consolidated. Officials who opposed her were demoted, exiled, or charged with crimes. Her own sons, when they proved insufficiently compliant, were deposed. One died in exile under circumstances that were never satisfactorily explained. She created a system of anonymous denunciation boxes, placed in public throughout the capital, that encouraged commoners to report officials directly to the throne, bypassing the bureaucratic hierarchy entirely and keeping the entire administrative class in a state of continuous anxiety about what their colleagues might report. Under her rule, the Tang Empire expanded, the economy grew, and the examination system for selecting officials by merit rather than birth was significantly strengthened. The historians who despised her could not deny the results. They recorded both. Mary I of England. Mary Tudor came to the throne in 1553 after one of the more turbulent successions in English history. Her father, Henry VIII, had declared her illegitimate. Her brother Edward VI had attempted to bypass her in favor of Lady Jane Grey, and she had spent most of her adult life in a condition of legal and personal uncertainty that would have broken most people. She was 37 years old when she became queen, the first woman to rule England in her own right, and she had, by then, a fixed and unalterable sense of what she needed to do. England had broken from Rome under her father. She intended to return it. The method she chose and the speed with which she chose it produced the name that history has given her. Between February 1555 and November 1558, Mary's government burned approximately 280 people at the stake for heresy. The number is precise because the records are precise. The names, dates, and locations of the executions were documented by the Protestant martyrologist John Fox in his Acts and Monuments, a work so widely read in Elizabethan England that copies were placed in churches alongside the Bible. The burnings were public. They were intended to be public. The theology was straightforward. A heretic who died unrecanted died in a state that endangered their soul eternally, and the state was therefore doing the merciful thing by giving them one final opportunity to recant before the fire was lit. Most did not recant. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, who had annulled her parents' marriage and declared her illegitimate, was burned at Oxford in March 1556. He had initially recanted under pressure, then withdrew his recantation at the stake, holding the hand that had signed the recantation into the fire first, so that it would burn before the rest of him. The burnings did not produce the religious reconversion Mary had anticipated. They produced Fox's book, which produced a Protestant martyrology so powerful that it shaped English religious identity for the next century. Mary died in November 1558, possibly of uterine or ovarian cancer, after 2 phantom pregnancies that had led her to believe she was carrying the Catholic heir England needed. She was 42. Her half-sister Elizabeth succeeded her, returned England to Protestantism within months, and reigned for 45 years. The name Bloody Mary is not a neutral historical assessment. It is what the winning side called her. The losing side had been burned. Isabella I of Castile. Isabella of Castile and her husband Ferdinand of Aragon completed the Reconquista in 1492, the 7th-century campaign to drive Islamic rule from the Iberian Peninsula, captured Granada, the last Muslim kingdom in Spain, and in the same year financed Christopher Columbus's westward voyage. The year 1492 is, in the standard telling, the year Spain became a world power and the age of European colonial expansion began. It is also the year Isabella signed the Alhambra Decree, expelling every Jewish person from Spain who refused baptism. Approximately 150,000 to 200,000 people were expelled. Those who converted and remained were subject to the institution Isabella had helped establish 14 years earlier to monitor exactly that. The Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition was formally requested by Isabella and Ferdinand from Pope Sixtus IV in 1478 and operated under royal rather than papal control from its inception, a jurisdictional arrangement that Sixtus later attempted to reverse and failed. Its first Grand Inquisitor, Tomás de Torquemada, was Isabella's own confessor. Under Torquemada's direction, between 1483 and 1498, the Inquisition processed thousands of cases of suspected false conversion. Conversos, Jewish and Muslim converts to Christianity, suspected of secretly maintaining their original practices. The standard tools of the Inquisition's interrogation were documented in its own procedural manuals: sleep deprivation, the strapado, the rack, the toca, a form of controlled drowning. Historians debate the total number executed during the full span of the Inquisition's operation, with estimates ranging from 3,000 to 30,000 over 3.5 centuries, with the highest concentration of executions occurring in the early decades under Torquemada. What is not disputed is the institutional architecture Isabella built, and what it was used for. The Inquisition she established outlasted her by 350 years, surviving until 1834. The colonial apparatus she authorized with the Columbus voyage produced the encomienda system, under which indigenous populations of the Americas were assigned as forced labor to Spanish colonists, the legal foundation of a demographic catastrophe that killed, by most scholarly estimates, between 50 and 90% of the pre-contact indigenous population of the Americas within a century of contact, through a combination of disease, violence, and forced labor. Isabella died in 1504. She was buried in Granada, in the city she had captured 12 years earlier. The processes she set in motion were still operating 3 centuries after her death. The Inquisition was never something that happened to Spain from outside. It was something Spain built, and Isabella built it. Catherine de Medici. Catherine de Medici arrived in France in 1533 as a 14-year-old bride for the future Henry II, with no political allies, no French language, and the disadvantage of being a Medici, a banking family, not a royal house, in a court that made clear it considered her beneath the position she occupied. Henry's mistress, Diane de Poitiers, held more actual influence for most of his reign than his wife. When Henry died in a jousting accident in 1559, Catherine became regent for her son Francis II, then for Charles IX, and then for Henry III, wielding real power for 30 years while keeping her children on the throne of France. She navigated the wars of religion between Catholics and Huguenots through a policy of strategic compromise, pragmatic tolerance, and, when necessary, the kind of decision that cannot be described as anything other than what it was. On August 24th, 1572, the feast of Saint Bartholomew, the systematic killing of Huguenot leaders assembled in Paris for the wedding of Catherine's daughter Margaret to the Protestant Henry of Navarre began. The killing spread from the targeted assassination of Huguenot military commanders to a general massacre of Protestant civilians in Paris and then across the provinces. Modern historical estimates of the total death toll range from 5,000 to 30,000, with the killing continuing in some regions for weeks. Catherine's precise role in ordering the massacre, as opposed to the initial targeted killings, has been debated by historians for 4.5 centuries. What is not disputed is that she approved the decision to kill the Huguenot leadership before it could organize a response to an earlier assassination attempt, that she was present at the French court when the orders were given, and that Pope Gregory XIII, upon receiving the news, had a medal struck to commemorate the event. Catherine outlived 3 of her 10 children, watched the wars of religion consume the country she had spent 3 decades trying to hold together, and died in January 1589. 8 months before her last surviving son, Henry III, was assassinated by a Dominican friar. She had maneuvered, compromised, married her children into every available royal house in Europe, and authorized a massacre. None of it was enough. The Valois dynasty she had spent her life sustaining ended with Henry III. The throne passed to the Protestant Henry of Navarre, the same man who had been the intended groom at the wedding that preceded the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. He converted to Catholicism to take the crown, reportedly observing that Paris was worth a mass. Catherine would have understood the calculation entirely. Empress Dowager Cixi. Cixi entered the Forbidden City in 1851 as one of several dozen imperial concubines selected for the Xianfeng Emperor through the standard Manchu selection process. She was 16 years old and the daughter of a minor official. She bore the emperor his only surviving son in 1856, which elevated her status significantly, and when the Xianfeng Emperor died in 1861, she moved immediately. Within months, she had organized a coup against the 8-man Regency Council the emperor had appointed, had 2 of its members executed and the rest removed, and established herself as co-regent alongside the empress consort, Xian. The senior empress, who was politically passive and died in 1881 under circumstances that contemporaries found suspicious and historians have never resolved. Cixi governed China, with one brief interruption, for 47 years. The interruption came in 1898 when the Guangxu Emperor, her adopted nephew, whom she had placed on the throne, launched the 100 Days Reform, a sweeping modernization program designed to transform China along Japanese Meiji-era lines. Cixi reversed it in approximately 100 days. The reformers fled or were executed. The emperor was placed under house arrest on an island in the Imperial Lake within the walls of the Forbidden City, where he remained for the rest of his life. He died on November 14, 1908. Cixi died the following day. Modern forensic analysis conducted on the emperor's remains in 2008 using X-ray fluorescent spectroscopy found arsenic levels in his hair approximately 2,000 times the normal concentration. The Qing court had the means, the motive, and the established pattern. The finding has not been seriously disputed. What Cixi did to China during 47 years of effective control is a question Chinese and Western historians have argued about with unusual intensity. She suppressed the Taiping Rebellion, one of the deadliest civil wars in human history. She mismanaged the response to the First Sino-Japanese War so comprehensively that China lost Taiwan. She supported the Boxer Uprising against foreign powers in 1900, which resulted in an 8-nation military intervention, the occupation of Beijing, and the Boxer Protocol, a settlement so punishing that it imposed indemnity payments that consumed 39% of the Qing government's annual revenue. She diverted naval modernization funds to rebuild the Summer Palace. The battleship that money should have bought was not at the Battle of the Yellow Sea in 1894. The palace still stands. The Qing dynasty fell in 1912, 3 years after her death. The emperor she had imprisoned and almost certainly poisoned had been the last person with the authority to prevent it. Ranavalona I of Madagascar. Ranavalona I became Queen of Madagascar in 1828, following the death of her husband King Radama I, and by some accounts with active assistance in producing that death. Radama had pursued a policy of openness to European missionaries, British military advisors, and Western technology. Ranavalona reversed all of it. She expelled most foreign missionaries, banned the practice of Christianity under penalty of death, cancelled the treaties Radama had signed with Britain, and expelled British diplomatic representatives. Madagascar under Ranavalona became, deliberately and by royal decree, sealed against the outside world. What happened inside the seal is documented in the accounts of the few Europeans who remained, primarily French engineer Jean Laborde, who became her business partner and possibly her lover, and who ran a complex of workshops that produced weapons, silk, soap, and gunpowder using Malagasy forced labor. The Tangina ordeal was the primary instrument of Ranavalona's legal system, a trial by poison in which the accused was required to drink the juice of the Tangina nut and then swallow 3 pieces of chicken skin. If the person vomited all 3 pieces, they were innocent. If they died or retained even 1 piece, they were guilty. It was administered not only to the accused, but sometimes to their families and livestock. Estimates of the number of people who died under the Tangina ordeal during Ranavalona's reign range from between 10 and 100,000. The uncertainty reflecting the near total absence of systematic record-keeping. The population of Madagascar at the start of her reign has been estimated at approximately 5 million. By the time she died in 1861, after 33 years on the throne, contemporary estimates placed the population at between 2 and 2.5 million. The causes were multiple. The Tangina ordeal, executions of Christians and political opponents, forced labor, and military campaigns against internal rivals that routinely killed soldiers and civilian populations alike. When she died peacefully in her sleep at approximately 80 years old, her son Radama II immediately reversed her policies, restored relations with European powers, and abolished the Tangina ordeal. The missionaries returned. Christianity spread rapidly through a population that had survived 3 decades of prohibition. Ranavalona had tried to seal Madagascar against the 19th century. She kept it out for 33 years. It arrived the day after she died. Irene of Athens. Irene of Athens was selected as a bride for the Byzantine Emperor Leo IV through a bride show, a process in which candidates were brought to Constantinople from across the empire and evaluated for suitability. She was chosen around 769, married Leo IV, bore him a son who became Constantine VI, and when Leo died of fever in 780, became regent for her 10-year-old boy. The Byzantine Empire had been convulsed for decades by the iconoclast controversy. The theological dispute over whether images of Christ and the saints constituted idolatry. Leo IV had been an iconoclast. Irene was not. She reversed imperial religious policy, convened the Second Council of Nicaea in 787, restored the veneration of icons, and secured herself a place in Eastern Orthodox tradition that eventually produced her canonization as a saint. The path from regent to saint ran directly through what she did to her own son. Constantine VI reached adulthood and did what emperors were supposed to do. He attempted to rule. Irene did not find this arrangement satisfactory. She had him arrested in 790, but the military restored him to power and forced her into temporary exile. She recovered her influence, returned to court, and spent the following years working methodically to undermine her son's position. She cultivated his enemies, spread accounts of his incompetence, and built a coalition against him. On August 15, 797, Constantine VI was arrested by officials acting on his mother's orders, brought to the purple chamber of the palace where he had been born, and had his eyes put out, deliberately and with sufficient thoroughness that he died of the injuries shortly after. Irene then ruled alone as Basileus, emperor using the male title, for 5 years. She was deposed in 802 by a palace coup, exiled to the island of Lesbos, where she was required to support herself by spinning wool, and died there in 803. Charlemagne, who had been crowned Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day 800, had apparently considered proposing marriage to her, a union that would have consolidated the two halves of the former Roman world under a single rule. The proposal, if it existed, came to nothing. Irene died on Lesbos, spinning. The son she had blinded was buried without ceremony. The church that canonized her based its decision on her role in restoring icon veneration. The canonization does not mention Constantine VI, Elizabeth Báthory. Elizabeth Báthory was born in 1560 into one of the most powerful noble families in Hungary, a family that had produced cardinals, princes, and a king of Poland. She was educated, she spoke 4 languages, and she married Ferenc Nadasdy, one of Hungary's leading military commanders, at the age of 15. When Nadasdy died in 1604, she was 44 years old, a widow in control of substantial estates, and, by the accounts assembled in the investigation that followed, a household that had been engaged for years in the systematic torture and murder of young women brought in as servants. The investigation was conducted in 1610 and 1611 by György Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, following years of rumors that had become impossible to ignore. Thurzo's investigators interviewed approximately 300 witnesses. The testimony described a sustained pattern of torture, burning, beating, mutilation, inflicted on girls and young women from the surrounding villages, and later from minor noble families who had sent their daughters to the Báthory household for education. The number of victims cited in the testimony ranged from dozens to over 600. The figure of 650, which appeared in the testimony of one of Báthory's own servants, became the number most associated with her name, though modern historians treat it with caution. What is not disputed is that bodies were found, that the testimony of witnesses was consistent and detailed, and that Báthory herself never stood trial. Her noble status protected her from the formal judicial process that executed 4 of her servants. Thurzo had her walled into a suite of rooms in Cixi Castle, the windows bricked up. Food passed through a small slot, where she remained until her death in August 1614, approximately 3.5 years later. A guard checking on her found her face down on the floor. She was 54. The case she left behind became, centuries later, the foundation of a legend that accumulated details, bathing in blood to preserve her youth, that do not appear in the original testimonies. The legend proved more durable than the documentation. She did not need the legend. The documentation was sufficient. Empress Theodora. Theodora was born around 500 AD into the lowest stratum of Byzantine society. Her father was a bearkeeper at the Hippodrome, a position that placed the family at the absolute social bottom of Constantinople. She worked as an actress and mime performer, occupations that carried in Byzantine law and custom the formal legal designation of infamy. Without honor, legally barred from marrying a man of senatorial rank, she met Justinian, nephew of the Emperor Justin I, converted to Chalcedonian Christianity from the Miaphysite sect, and acquired sufficient influence over him that he had the law changed. They married in 525. 3 years later, Justinian became emperor, and Theodora became empress of the Eastern Roman Empire. In January 532, Constantinople exploded. The Nika Revolt began as a dispute between the chariot racing factions, the Blues and the Greens, and escalated into a general uprising against Justinian's government that burned half the city and produced the proclamation of a rival emperor. Justinian's advisors prepared ships for flight. Procopius records that it was Theodora who stopped the evacuation, addressing the imperial council in terms that the historian recorded verbatim, or close to it, that she would not flee, that the imperial purple was a fine burial shroud, and that those who had lived could run if they wished. Justinian did not run. He sent his generals Belisarius and Mundus into the hippodrome, where the rebel factions had assembled. Procopius records approximately 30,000 dead in the hippodrome that day. The revolt ended. The rival emperor was executed. Constantinople was rebuilt. Procopius, who recorded Theodora's speech in his official history, also wrote the secret history, an unpublished account of the reign in which he described her in terms of comprehensive sexual and political depravity that make it difficult to use as a straight historical source. Historians generally read the secret history as a document of what Byzantine men feared about female power rather than a reliable account of events. What the official sources establish is sufficient. A woman born infamis, barred by law from the class she entered, who used her position to extend legal protections to women, reforming divorce law, outlawing forced prostitution, giving women rights in property disputes, and who, when the empire she had risen to rule was about to collapse, was the one person in the throne room who refused to leave. Justinian rebuilt the Hagia Sophia after the fires of the Nika revolt. His name is on the building. Theodora's face is in the mosaics. She appears to be watching. Queen Jezebel. Jezebel was a Phoenician princess, daughter of the king of Tyre, who married Ahab, king of Israel, in the 9th century BC as part of a political alliance between the two kingdoms. The marriage brought trade connections, Phoenician craftsmen, and the worship of Baal and Asherah into the Israelite court. It also brought Jezebel herself, who is presented in the books of Kings as the dominant force in the marriage and the primary driver of the religious policy that made Ahab's reign the central subject of prophetic condemnation in the Hebrew Bible. The biblical account is the primary surviving source, which means it was written by people who had concluded that Jezebel was the proximate cause of Israel's departure from the covenant, and their account should be read accordingly. What it records is this: Jezebel systematically killed the prophets of Yahweh. The prophet Obadiah hid 100 of them in 2 caves to keep them alive. She installed 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah at the royal court, supported directly from the palace food supply. When the prophet Elijah defeated and killed the prophets of Baal at the contest on Mount Carmel, Jezebel sent him a message informing him that she would have him killed within 24 hours. He fled into the desert. When Ahab wanted a vineyard belonging to a man named Naboth, who refused to sell it, Jezebel arranged for Naboth to be falsely accused of blasphemy, had him stoned to death, and handed Ahab the vineyard. The prophet Elijah delivered the verdict. The dogs would lick his blood in the same place they had licked Naboth's. The verdict was accurate and applied to Jezebel as well. When the military commander Jehu staged his coup and killed Ahab's son, Jezebel, knowing what was coming, put on eye makeup, dressed her hair, and appeared at the window as Jehu arrived below. She called him a murderer. He ordered her thrown from the window. Her blood splattered the wall. The horses trampled her. When they went to bury her, they found only her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. The dogs had done what Elijah said they would. She had ruled as she chose, in a tradition that was not her husband's, and she faced what was coming from a window, in full ceremonial dress, insulting the man who had come to kill her. History wrote her as a villain. She was also, by any available evidence, absolutely fearless. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.